If you've been around the hard sci-fi scene, you've probably heard someone say this: there is no stealth in space. So the reasoning goes, space is mostly empty and cold, so a spaceship would therefore stand out like a nuclear bomb in the Arctic. Any attempt to create a stealth spacecraft will invariably lead to the writer tossing out thermodynamics or creating a scenario so situational it's basically useless. However, I believe this rule is incorrect, or at least oversimplified. In this video, I'll be talking about why stealth may be feasible in space combat, at least in some settings, and the circumstances in which it could occur. Before we get started, there are a couple quick qualifiers that need to be addressed. For the purposes of this video, we are assuming a scenario between technologically equivalent factions. If one side grossly outclasses the other, stealth isn't exactly necessary. Second, we are assuming a setting with high velocity space travel, the kind that can traverse solar systems or even interstellar distances in days or hours. It doesn't matter how this is accomplished, whether it's through torch ships or Epstein drives or Alcubierre bubbles or even FTL, just not slow Hohmann maneuvers. Finally, for now we are assuming that we are talking about two spaceships trying to detect each other. The main reason for the assumption that there is no stealth in space is heat. Even at a standstill, a spaceship emits a significant amount of waste heat compared to the 3 Kelvin background, and once it turns on its engine, the ship will stand out like a beacon. For a reference of how much it stands out, think about this. Scientists estimate that when the space shuttle ignited its main engines, it could have been seen by a telescope all the way out at Pluto. The types of engines we're talking about in the future will only be brighter. Now, all of this is absolutely correct. Case closed, stealth in space is impossible. Except there's one thing that always gets overlooked. Who is looking? When it comes to these discussions, what rarely gets mentioned is the sensors used to detect things in space. When they are mentioned, it is merely assumed that the sensors used will be better than what we have in the present day. What is usually left out is how. For the most part, improving a telescope's imaging comes down to a few basic things: increasing the exposure time, increasing its ability to collect the light, and increasing the construction precision and quality. The latter is fairly simple. If the lens and sensor are higher quality and more precise, there is less distortion and noise to deal with. However, there is also a clear physical ceiling to how much this can be improved. The James Webb Telescope, for example, probably represents the best results that can be achieved with equipment quality. Most further improvements will come in the form of perfecting the construction process and decreasing costs. Exposure time is also fairly simple. The longer the sensors are exposed to light, the more information is collected and the higher quality that information will be. This is mostly affected by how long you can hold the sensor on target, which is mostly determined by budget and time constraints rather than technology. So the main room for improving a sensor is increasing the amount of light the sensor is able to detect. This is mostly influenced by the size of the various focusing elements and the size of the sensor. Bigger is always better for sensitivity. This isn't so much a technological hurdle so much as an engineering one, but it does mean that detecting spaceships will require big, bulky equipment regardless of how advanced you think your sensors are. However, this issue is obviously not insurmountable. In the real world, we've been launching large telescopes for years, so unless there has been some serious technological decline, it shouldn't be a problem for a spacefaring civilization. Except we're not just trying to build a good telescope here, we're trying to stick it on a battleship. Spaceships require a lot of things to function. You need weapons, of course, otherwise it isn't a warship, and engines, otherwise it isn't a ship. However, a ship also needs fuel, a power source, ammunition, life support, supplies, radiators, armor, radiation shielding, computers, an FTL drive, and all sorts of other things. And you probably want redundancies for these just in case your main computer shorts out or your radiators get hit by a meteorite. And for a warship, you want all of this in as tight a space as possible to provide a smaller target profile and save on construction costs. And now you want to cram a big telescope on there? Does anyone else see the problem here? The simple fact is, mounting better optical systems on a warship requires progressively more space, which will inevitably come at the expense of other important systems. While I believe many ship designers would consider this trade-off worth it for the sake of increased situational awareness, others might not, especially for smaller ships. As such, I think it isn't inconceivable that many starships will only have a basic internal sensors that with a range of a few thousand kilometers, which in space terms is a virtually knife fighting range. Any ships beyond that might as well be invisible. If a space navy did design their ships this way, they'd probably rely heavily on dedicated sensor vessels, sort of like AWACS aircraft in the real world. These AWACS ships would be mounted with telescopes capable of seeing beyond the ranges of most warships, and feed that information to nearby vessels, scanning the sky for enemy ships and warning them in case of approaching threats. It is likely that a fleet would have a number of such ships supporting them to provide as much situational awareness as possible. And planets would obviously be stationed with orbital telescopes around them as well. However, the presence of these AWACS alone doesn't nullify the factor of stealth. In order to find a hidden ship, one still needs to take that telescope and point it in the right direction. Fundamentally, the quality and maximum range of detection is directly correlated with the field of view of the sensor. Tightening the FOV increases the maximum range, and widening the FOV decreases it. This means that, assuming telescope technology remains semi-comparable, there won't be such thing as a long-range omnisensor that can look in all directions at once. An omnidirectional sensor is effectively limited to short-range detection, with long-range detection left to telescopes with a much narrower field of views. This means that in order to locate a ship, no matter how much energy it is giving off, the sensor will still have to scan the sky until it is within its field of view. Until that happens, the ship has free rein to move around undetected. One thing that you might have noticed is that none of this is a permanent guarantee of stealth. In reality, it is mostly out of control of the vessel trying to hide, and eventually, no matter what the ship does, it will get spotted if a ship with the right sensor equipment is looking. Even with the aforementioned FOV limitations, it would only take a few days or even just a few hours to get a complete survey of a ship's surroundings. And the moment that telescope is pointed in the right direction, it will take just seconds for it to recognize a warship against the background. A ship just entering the solar system can only assume a few hours before they get spotted, and even then it is no guarantee that some scanner won't point in just the right direction at just the right time. The question of course is, how useful are these few hours of stealth? The answer is quite a lot. In a setting where spaceships can travel quickly, a few hours of stealth can be a significant or even decisive advantage. For example, it makes reconnaissance almost trivial. A recon vessel can simply warp into the system, sit around mapping its surroundings for a few hours, and by the time it is detected, it can simply leave with all the information it has gathered. This also helps with planning an attack. If an invasion force is preparing to assault a planet, they can use that time to assess the enemy defenses and fine-tune their strategy before they've been detected. If they already have a plan in place, the attackers could even use the time to set off at speeds approaching C and arrive just a few minutes after their light first reaches the defenders. Though they will be detected well before arriving in weapons range, this could mean that the defending force only has a few minutes to launch ships before starfighters and battleships are lobbing missiles at them. Most frighteningly, a few hours of stealth is enough time to launch a relativistic kill vehicle. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, RKVs refer to kinetic projectiles traveling at velocities approaching the speed of light. Slower ones are capable of easily wiping out space stations, ships, military bases, or even cities, and faster ones can wipe clean continents or even entire planets. These planet crackers usually come with little to no warning and are devastating unless properly countered, so civilizations in such a setting would have to invest heavily in observation stations to detect these weapons before they strike. This brings us to one final factor affecting the existence of stealth in space: the speed of light. Unless a civilization has some form of FTL sensors, the speed at which they can detect something is limited by how far away it is. If an object emerges from warp at a distance of 8 AUs, the light will only reach the observer about an hour later. In that time, the ship can move without the observer even knowing that they are there. Depending on what kind of propulsion the attacker has, that is even more time to get accelerated and start zooming in-system. If they are capable of in-system FTL travel, the attackers could even arrive inside weapons range before the defenders get the chance to respond. Though the degree of damage a ship can achieve thanks to stealth is significant, there are some limitations. First, aside from relativistic kill weapons or FTL microjump, there will almost never be a circumstance in which a ship can sneak into weapons range of another ship. They will be able to detect you within at least a few light seconds, and so have at least a couple minutes of warning. Second, the defenders can mitigate the amount of stealth the attackers will have through placing orbital telescopes and other detection facilities around their planets. The more they place up there, the faster they can scan the sky. Finally, once a ship is spotted, there are very few ways to become stealthy again. Excluding extreme circumstances or the observer's incompetence, it is very easy to track a ship once its general area has been located. All of this means that stealth is never an absolute. It is merely one factor that fleets will have to consider when conducting military operations. I hope regardless that this information helps you when creating your own sci-fi setting. In the meantime, however, I will see you all Starside. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Starside. If you have another topic you want me to cover, make sure to comment down below and it may just become my next video. If you're interested in more, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Anyway, have a great rest of your day.